everyone, and welcome to our unit on the elements of art. The elements of art are what artists use to make art. In fact, all artworks are made up of the elements of art. In this lesson, we're going to be covering the first element of art, which is line, and there's going to be an art lesson at the very end. Line is probably one of the most simple elements there are. In fact, it's one of the most simplest terms in art that there is. It's a line. It goes from point A to point B with a connection between the 2 points. Now, something that a lot of people don't know about line is there's actually 2 different types. The first type being a defined line, while the other type being an implied line. A defined line is a line that separates 2 objects. For instance, you have a defined line around the apple on the left, where a defined line is separating the foreground from the background. You see a distinct black line around the apple that tells your eye this is different from the background and the foreground. It separates 2 different areas. On the other hand, the apple on the right uses implied line. Even though you do not actually see a line around the apple, your eye can visually tell you that this is a highlight because there is an implied line that connects the other values and separates the background from the foreground, even though there's nothing that's actually there to define a separation. Now that we know the difference between a defined line and an implied line, let's look at some examples. So pause the video and I want you to count how many triangles you see in this artwork. Did you finish counting? The correct answer is 0. There are 0 triangles in this artwork. A triangle is made up of 3 lines and 3 corners, all 3 lines connected. There is no third line or third corner connecting any of these shapes. It is implied that the lines are there.
I don't get it.
Kind of like in this artwork. This artwork, whenever you look at it, you can see that it's a bunch of lines, but your eye may tell you that there's also 2 triangles inside of this artwork. That is from wherever the lines meet at a corner and create an implied line that creates a diamond, or actually 2 diamonds in this artwork. Now, this is a more advanced topic in art, but line placement and line thickness also plays a crucial role in creating artwork. So for instance, in this artwork, obviously it's a cat. We know it's a cat because of the way that the line is placed in the form of a cat. However, line thickness also plays a role. We understand a cat to have bushy tails, so the line for the tail in this artwork is a lot thicker than the lines for the ears because cats have very delicate, thin ears, or even the whiskers. If these 2 line thicknesses were swapped, this would no longer look like a cat. Instead, it would look more like a rat, because a rat and a cat have very similar structure, but the line will actually make one animal look more like the other. It is line placement and line thickness that creates the illusion that the paper is actually curving up and folding down like a weight. In actuality, this is just a flat piece of paper. Now, I do have students comment and say that there's shading on there and the shading adds to the illusion, and yes, that is true. The shading does add to the illusion, but the line thickness and placement is the majority of this illusion. Even if you take out the shading, you will still see a wave in the lines because when the lines get closer to the viewer, they get thicker. When they're further away, they get smaller. And that is the element of art known as line. And shape happens whenever you have a line. So from point A to point B, that line either closes off and meets itself back around, or it intersects other lines. Basically, if it is left open, it's a line. If it is closed, then it's a shape. Now, there's 2 different types of shapes: geometric shapes and organic shapes. Geometric is the root word of geometry, or in other words, it's a shape that you can make using math. Pretty much if it has a straight line, if it has corners, or if it's a circle or an oval, it's a geometric shape. If you can look at that and say, oh, that is triangle, rectangle, hexagon, dodecagon, all those are geometric shapes. And an organic shape means that it is very difficult to reproduce it, just like our example that we have here. I like to think of organic shapes either being like something in nature, like a leaf, that no matter how many leaves you look at, there's always going to be something that is different with each one. Or possibly like if you look at a parking lot and you see a puddle with some oil on it and you see all those little pretty colors and shapes in them, all of those are organic shapes. So why are shapes important? Believe it or not, artists actually see the world around them as shapes. And the reason for that is because it makes it a lot easier for you to interpret things when you look at them as simple shapes. For example, looking at this, if I were to tell my students to paint or draw the picture of the apples that you see here, most of them are going to look at that and say, how exactly do you expect me to do that? Look at those shapes, look at the coloring on there, and I don't even know what those things are down at the bottom of that cloth. I'm not going to do that.
I can't do it. I can't do it, Squidward.
They're overthinking it, and more than likely, you are probably overthinking this too. You see, those are not apples. They are just shapes. They are basic circles, and then the stems are rectangles. Everything down below it, it's just organic shapes. And then once you get those basic shapes down, it doesn't have to match perfectly. The rest of the artwork becomes a coloring book page. And we all have done coloring book pages. You just took something that's really complicated and made it something really simple and approachable. That is why shapes are so important to artists. And I'm going to be telling you this from now until the end of your time in my class. You need to break everything down into basic shapes. So let's look at some examples. I have a few pictures I want you to look at and pause. Are they geometric shapes or are they organic shapes? Do you have your answer? This is a bunch of organic shapes. Now, some of them, for instance, the little red square looking thing you see right there, might look like a square. It's not really a square. It's still a torn piece of paper. If you look closely at it, there are some wavy lines on there. All of those are organic shapes because they don't have straight lines or corners, and none of those shapes you can actually recognize as shapes. Well, what about this? Is this organic shapes or geometric shapes? While it might be an organic subject matter, all the shapes on the inside of it are made up of geometric shapes. Triangles, rectangles, and circles. What about this? Is it geometric or is it organic? If you said both, then you are correct. It has both of them on there. You have the geometric shapes, such as the triangles and rectangles, and then you have the organic shapes like the booger thing and the jelly bean. I don't know. Now that concludes our presentation on the elements of art known as shape. However, that's not where our total presentation ends. Instead, I need to introduce you to your lesson. And for that lesson, we're going to be looking at Zentangled. Now, Zentangled is an art form that has actually been around a little bit longer than the name state that it has, and I'll get into that in a little bit. But basically, Zentangled is a method of getting into a Zen state while completing artwork. It's a great way to let your mind kind of wander while you are creating art, and you can come up with some really extravagant, wondrous things like you see here in this example. Like I mentioned, Zentangled is kind of like a meditation type deal where it's meditating while doing art. It's recommended that you use a pen so you can't go back and erase what you did. Instead, it's left on the paper and you have to either deal with it or work around it. Now, the name Zentangled was actually pioneered by these two creators right here. The main creator is Maria Thomas, and she's a professional calligrapher, and the man in the picture is her her partner, Rick Roberts. She was describing to him one day about her process of making calligraphy, which is actually right here, where she just kind of said that she starts an artwork and kind of gets lost in it. And then he told her, hey, that's a lot like meditation. And they kind of thought about this and worked back and forth and started selling this as a course as Zentangled. But in actuality, Zentangled has been around for a lot longer than that. Think of it this way. It was kind of like Sir Isaac Newton discovering gravity. Gravity had been around forever. He just put a name to it. Just like with this has been around forever, they just put a name to it. And as proof that this has been around forever, this is actually one of my artworks that I made before I even heard about Zentangled. It was around the same time as their development of it. And I've been doing this for years because it's a form of art known as doodling. So what's the point in Zentangled? Well, the point in Zentangled is to fill in every single gap that you possibly can with something. Shapes, objects, imagery, pretty much whatever you want to put in those empty spaces, you can. What we are going to be using this for is creating your very own Zentangled using shapes. So see how I tied that back in with the elements of art? Now the purpose with this assignment is to introduce you to the idea of taking longer than just a few minutes on an artwork. This is an artwork or an art piece that you're going to be spending a week on. So an entire week of school, you're going to be spending on this one project. And that means that you can't just rush it and get it done. You need to really dedicate some time to it and let yourself get lost in the artwork. And as you can see here, I just start with a basic shape and I just start adding in all these other shapes into it. Little detail lines here and there, filling in gaps, and I'm not thinking about anything that's going on there. I started with a square, drew some little squiggly lines in there and just said, hey, that kind of looks like an eye, or hey, that kind of looks like a flower, that kind of looks like this. And I just let my imagination go. And that's pretty much what you're doing with this artwork. You will be having an entire week to dedicate to creating a Zentangled. It's going to be on a full sheet of paper, so a regular 8.5 by 11 piece of paper. You can ink it if you choose to. You can just use pencil. It's entirely up to you. But you will be spending a week on this. So even if you get finished with it, you're going to be starting another one. Please keep in mind, I do not grade you based on finishing. I grade you based on your work ethic. So the longer you work on it or the harder you work on it, the better grade you're going to get. If you try and finish it in just a few minutes and slack off for the rest of the week, your grade will reflect that. Thank you all very much. I hope you enjoy this lesson. If you have any questions, let me know.